American society doesn't understand Latinos because in Latin America, you have telenovelas and everyone in the telenovela is European looking. Americans, they're like, oh, Latinos look like Shakira and Sofia Vergara. They don't look like Laz Alonso or Zoe Saldana. You always see the same shows. A Mexican family, somebody gets deported. A Mexican family, there's a cartel. I'm lucky that I still feel very close to my culture, but there are a lot of American Latinos who like they don't know anything about their histories or their countries or other countries in Latin America. I love writing for Star Wars. Some writers when they look at Star Wars, they think a lot of like Japanese influence or Arabic and Indian influences. So I'm like, all right, so now we're going to have some Andean influence over here.
Hello and welcome to the podcast Telar Maestro. I'm happy today to be joined by Zoraida Córdova. She's a writer, she's an author of science fiction and fantasy novels and short stories. She have written around 2,000 novels and short stories, including the Brooklyn series Brujas and Star Wars The High Republic Convergence, The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina, and among others. She was born in Guayaquil, Ecuador, the city where I'm from, and she currently lives in New York. Welcome, Soraya.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, happy that talking with you. I was telling you that I discovered about your work because I was staying in New York in a friend's house, and she had one of your books, The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina, and I was super curious about the writing style in the book because for me it felt like it was a mixture between this rural US and also start turning in this more magic realism story, and it was a mixture between magic and also rural and also a little bit of city because it was a little bit also past and present. And yeah, and also I then started researching about your works and or your background, and I was super interesting because yeah, I thought that your background is unique. You come from Ecuador, and you now live in New York, and you're a writer. Can you tell me a little bit about how did you end up in New York?
My thank you. Well, my mother immigrated here when I was 3. But I stayed in Ecuador with my dad for a little while until our paperwork, cleared. And but before that, my grandmother and her sister were the first people in the 80s to leave Guayaquil, um, and from our family. And then so little by little, my mom, and then she sent for her siblings and me and my brother. But I stayed in Ecuador until I was 7, and then we moved to or 6 because I did the first grade in New York. um, and yeah, and so then we moved to New York, and so I would still go to Ecuador to visit my dad in the summers and things like that.
I see. So, can you tell me a little bit about how was your childhood and how this changed when you went to New York? Because I mean, this was a different world, especially when you're a kid.
And when I was little, I was in bilingual classes in school because in New York, a lot of towns, a lot of cities, especially in Queens, where I grew up, they had classes for students that didn't speak English yet. So I was in like English as a second language classes until I was 10, and then when I was 10, it's sort of like my brain switched languages. You speak like 3 languages, so right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, and so my childhood was pretty normal. My mom, uh, which is, weird considering I write such weird fiction. But my mom worked, all the time. So I was mostly raised by my uncles and my aunt. And when I was 13, I read a book by a girl who was she got her book published, but she was 13 years old too, and I that was the moment that I realized that I could be a writer because this other person who was my same age did
Mm.
it. And I didn't know how to become a writer. I didn't know, what you had to do or how you got your book into a publisher. So I just started reading everything. But I didn't like to read regular fiction books. I like to read fantasy and books about monsters and legends and mythology and witchcraft. So my grandmother would always think I was possessed by a demon, Niña del Diablo or whatever.
Yeah, but your grandmother was living in New York already.
Mm-hmm.
So, but how was before moving to New York? Your experience, like, okay, because this is a high contrast, like, between
Mm-hmm.
your childhood. Or did you already visit New York before moving to
I think
there?
I did visit, but I don't remember it. I was 3, so I have a picture of me in Washington D.C. I have no memory of it. But in Ecuador, I always remembered, like, I grew up. I'm from a town called La Tarazana,
Yeah.
and so I grew up in, like, you know playing by the river, and all, like, 70 cousins. The one memory I always have is my cousin teaching me how to ride a bike in La Tarazana. And I went back recently, and it's very different, and it's not like I remember it at all. But because my family's left, my grandmother was one of the first people to set up a house there. And so it used to be like all our family in that one street, and then now it's nobody's there anymore. Maybe
Yeah.
like a couple of families are left, but it's everybody's comes from different parts of Guayaquil in Ecuador to live there now.
That's interesting. Like the part of, I mean, the whole family living in this place. I guess this was a little bit of, um, I forgot the name in English of mangle. These trees that are with long roots.
Yeah, I forgot to. Like the willow trees,
Yeah, yeah. I don't. Maybe. Yeah.
K-pop trees.
Uh,
Maybe, is it the one from the book?
uh,
I
I
have a tree in the book, and yeah.
let me, maybe I will check it in Google Translate. But yeah, this because I mean Guayaquil is known for these long trees in these moody kind of waters, on these clay kind of waters. I think that Tarzan is close to these canals that go to the main river, and
Hmm.
I guess you were playing around this place.
Yeah, and that's why in the Inheritance of Orquídea Divina, it takes place in La Tarazana, but in the 1950s, and that was hard because I didn't really have a lot of research. I looked up some old newspapers and articles about when Guayaquil was, the the biggest port in Latin America. Um, and so I didn't have a lot of pictures. Uh, so I had to fill in some of the blanks.
So
Um,
you mean which period of time was that? Because I mean I've seen some museums that it was a big port, and also they used to produce high quality ships and wood.
yeah.
I
And
guess
so
you refer to that time.
yeah, and so but there were like the ship manufacturing, but then after there was like a period of time. I think like between the 1940 and 1950, where the specifically the street where I grew up on, there was nothing there until like 1950 something. So I just had to make some stuff up uh,
I think yeah, it makes
to
sense.
fit my book.
Yeah. And going back to the writing part, you said that you start being interested in these uh, fantasy and fiction books, and you were really interested in these worlds. Can you tell me a little bit of the styles of these writings? Were these mostly U.S. Writers, or were also mixed with Latin American writers?
Well, I've read mostly. So the books that the teachers gave me were books like The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, or Esperanza Rising. I think that's Pam something. I can't remember the author right now. But there were books about like young Mexican families living in like the poor side of town and things like that. And so they were, because they thought like, oh, you're Latina, you want this Mexican book.
Yes.
Uh, and so I didn't really understand that coming to the United States meant like, okay, now all of you are the same thing. Um, and there's more nuance than that. But I didn't want those books. I wanted magic. And so there were some, like, I obviously read Gabriel Garcia Marquez too young, and Isabel Allende. And I didn't read, I didn't read Borges until I was in college. But when I was younger and first learning about fiction, I had books in Spanish from Ecuador that were like cuentos de hadas, like fairy tales. But other than that, it was mostly just books by like teen fiction about vampires.
Yeah. So, but I guess that they have changed over the years because I guess I read that you develop more interest lately, or um, yeah, maybe recently or not recently, about more Latin American culture, like in the sense like how to infuse this mythology that is from Latin America, not only taking mythology from other cultures but creating your own mythology. So I guess at some point you start reading more about Latin America.
Uh, what do you mean, like with the Brooklyn Brujas series, or like in
Um,
general?
in general, I mean, like I guess you were more. There's still the magic part,
Mm-hmm.
what you read it was there, but you kind of shifted towards more Latin American culture.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it was natural because growing up, I loved TV shows that were about magic and mythology. So you have Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, Supernatural, The Vampire Diaries. And so that was really a big part in America. But when you watch those TV shows, there's not a single Latin person in the whole any show. And there's only a few black or African American actors in it too. So I started looking more to what does magic look like when it comes from Latin America, right? What is a TV show or a book like the ones that I love? How does it change if the characters are Latinos, specifically from Ecuador? And that didn't really happen until my my second series, because my first series was just mermaids, and then I really started thinking about what makes my work different, and what I can say about community and magic and things like that.
So then, what is your? Can you give me details about this mythology that you have found and the difference between magic, for example, from European, like I guess, stories compared to Latin American stories? Because I feel like there is I mean, I feel two things. There is a different ethos for sure. There is more the ethos in Europe about. I mean, because of the environment is different, right? The northern cultures are more about these small towns, and there is not much about family, but it's a little bit. I don't know. It's more isolation and things like that. In Latin America, the magic is throughout families around. It runs. It's interconnected, and yeah, I don't know. That's something that I realized. This is one thing. Another thing is that I feel like it's the magic is still present in Latin America. People still talk about magic in like it was normal. Like people are talking about shamans. There are still Latin
Yeah,
American.
there. Yeah.
There are tribes in the Amazon. So
Hmm.
this is in Europe. I mean, nobody really cares about that anymore. Um, yeah,
I
can you
think
tell me a little bit? Yeah, yeah.
there are still witches in Europe. I'm pretty sure. Actually, it's interesting because when I went to Ireland, um, when I went to Ireland this year in January, I went. I was in Ireland a few times the last 6 months, the last few months. So I went in for Halloween, for the El Dia de las Brujas, and they don't call it Halloween, obviously, but it for Halloween, the mythology of Halloween came from a town in Ireland, an area in Ireland called County Meath. I'm pretty sure. I don't want to butcher it. But when I was there, I was really fascinated to see that even though it's 2024, it was 2023 back then, but uh, people still believed in fairies and their old mythology, and also the um, the their Catholicism, and it reminded me of being in Ecuador when I remember one time I went to Ecuador and my grandmother got sick, and instead of going to the doctor, we went to some lady who did the egg,
Yeah,
le quitó el mal ojo.
yeah.
And, she slapped her with some leaves and did this whole ritual. And I was like, my whole life, we're like, oh, we're Catholic. But the Catholicism comes with this ancestral witchcraft that, comes from our indigenous roots. And it still survives. It just looks different and we call it different things. And so the parallel between, I always think that Irish people are like the Latinos of Europe because they're loud and they love music and they love their families and they're Catholic, and they also had a conquistador, right? Like they had Latin America had the Spanish and Ireland has the British. And so I always feel really like a kinship with Irish people. um, and so, but yeah, so the learning that magic in Latin America, where it feels like our superstition is like a lineage of something older. And I wish people would just realize that, right? That all this old stuff, this old magic is part of our culture too.
Yeah, actually talking about the egg. I mean, I talked actually in several episodes with people about this.
Are
My
you
si- yeah, my sister still does it until this day, and I mean, my
I
sister and my sister-in-law have done it to my nephews and nieces, and they say they work. I mean, they went to several doctors. The doctors didn't know what happened. My nieces were sick, and they used the egg. They rub the egg in the body.
I yeah, I did that to myself when I was so sick like a few months ago, and I was like, none of the pills, nothing was working. And I was like, I'm just gonna take this freaking egg and just like rub it all over my body. So it's it's there. We always have it.
But did it work?
It did.
That's amazing. Yeah,
So we'll
I'm
see.
amazed. Actually, I talked to a shaman, and he is from the U.S. and he, I mean, he moved to Peru because he was an anthropologist and he decided to become a shaman. Went to Peru and was trained by shamans in the Amazon. And I was asking him about the egg, and he told me that this is the shamans does it still, and this is a way for them in the mythology is that there is the broad spectrum called mal, that is when sickness, but mal de ojo is part of that. So the egg is a way of capture that mal that basically you have in your body, and seems to be legit shaman magic, if you can call it.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. Yeah, he told me different things actually. He told me like there is different kind of mals, and also there are different kind of. I didn't really went that deep into different kinds of mals, but it seems that it's really broad. It's not simply. I mean, the egg is just a small part of that, but because I had experience with shamans, I've been in the middle of the Amazon and I done ayahuasca, and I've been with real shamans with from the these Amazon tribes, and I was describing to this shaman from the U.S. about my experience with this ayahuasca, like limpia, that is called, that is
Mm-hmm.
cleansing, and that I felt like this cleansing with these fears were like creating these sounds and and with the voice, the shaman was doing these noises that felt like it was birds, and he was telling me that this is called bird medicine. So there is a different type of medicine in the Amazon that are, I guess, attached to different animals.
Yeah, I've always wanted to go to the Amazon. That's a part of Ecuador that I haven't visited yet.
Yeah,
Um,
super wild. But I mean, I'm not a normal, I guess, Ecuadorian. Not everybody goes to the Amazon and goes to, I guess, experience this. I I think that even though, I mean, I think the egg part is something that is part of this tradition, but it's I haven't been lost. But it's other parts are really not everybody goes to the shamans anymore. It's like more
mhm.
people are going to the doctors and shamans that
Right, and then
nowadays.
you
Yeah,
have your neighborhood brujas.
yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, there are like kind of shamans. Actually, shamans. I mean, that's what I really also find interesting about Latin American culture. This the that medicine people are can be woman or man. It's not like
Mhm.
priests in Catholicism that mostly are man,
Yeah.
and that is super interesting. Um, yeah, you tell me a little bit more about this mixture of the styles for your writing, and how do you think about what is your thought process when you're writing, and are you taking some reference from these books or these styles, or it's just I don't know, more streamlined thought and just put it everything there?
I my process, so when I sit down to write a book, I've been publishing books since 2012. So it's been like 12 years. And one thing that I've learned is like my writing process has changed every single book. Every book feels different. But the only thing that doesn't change is I usually start a book, I think of a character, and then from that character, I can see the world around them. So with the Inheritance of Orquídea Divina, um, that book came out of me in like the I think I had to feel really isolated to write it. Like I didn't hang out with friends. I didn't leave my house. I It was also the pandemic, so I couldn't leave my house. Uh, but I felt like I had to reach a different part of myself to write that book, because it started with Orquídea, and or it started with a short story that I published somewhere else, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then when I sat down to write the novel, I I sort of felt like I was taking a camera and I kept zooming out. So like first you see Orquídea, and then you zoom out, and then you see her living room, and then you see her family, and then you see the land that she lives in, until I could see her whole story. And so mixing my styles, I think I took all the fantasy that I've been writing for, at the time it was 8 years. So like all the fantasy that I've been writing and the science fiction, and then mixing it with like the books that I loved, like Cien Años de Soledad, or a hundred years of solitude, or like The House of Spirits by Isabel Allende, which are specifically two books that just like live in my head and their styles. Um, and so I think I just have a lot of different influences. Um, but the 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 first person that I think about when I'm writing is myself. Like, do I have to read this book 8 times minimum? So I'm the person who needs to like it and understand it and figure out what I'm trying to say about my character or about the world. Um, and I do that through the lens of science fiction and fantasy. So I want to talk about generational trauma and sort of like these grandmothers that are secretive and they don't talk about their past. And they don't, in America, they don't pass down anything to you. So I'm lucky that I still feel very close to my culture, but there are a lot of American Latinos who like they don't know anything about their histories or their countries or other countries in Latin America. Um, and so I instead of writing that kind of book, I wrote Orquídea Divina. So it's in the metaphor and in the characters. Um, I don't know if that was the answer to your
Yeah,
question,
no,
but
makes a lot of sense. Like, I mean, yeah, this is interesting. Like how I mean, U.S. culture is changing. There's a lot of migration, and my brother lives in the U.S. As well, in Washington.
oh, cool. Oh, in
So
Washington D.C. or Washington State?
Washington D.C. No, it's not
Oh,
Washington. It's Maryland. I think it's close to
oh
Washington.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's Washington D.C. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Hmm.
so he lives there, and I mean, he moved like a couple of years ago, and it's interesting because uh, him is going through the same thing that happens to me. Like the first years, okay, you are like getting used to the place, and you're no. I mean, he really liked the U.S. and I mean, I already moved like 4 years ago to Berlin or to Germany in general, but he just moved 2 years ago. So now he's like, okay, I want to know more about the culture. I want my children to know more about history about Ecuador, because I guess for him it's also okay. They will grow up, then in the high school they teach you everything about the U.S., but they don't know anything about Ecuador. So he's
Hmm.
buying these comic books called Capitan Escudo. That is like it seems to be kind of really popular in among children in Ecuador. Um, it's really it's really like Capitan America, but it turned into Ecuadorian Capitan
Oh my
Escudo.
God,
Yes.
that sounds cool.
Yeah. So
Uh,
yeah.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that.
So it seems that my nephews and nieces like it a lot. But it is interesting that it's happening, right? So a lot of migration from Latin America, and then after generations, this culture is being kind of lost, or I don't know if completely lost, but for sure the history is kind of cut in some ways.
You have to look for it. You have to go look for it. Like here, if there's so. Next week, I'm doing a book event for my new book, and there's a young guy who opened up a bookstore, and he's from Ecuador, and or his mom is from Ecuador, but he still feels Ecuadorian even though he doesn't speak Spanish and he's never been, he doesn't know, but he has created a community for people who love books in Jackson Heights and Queens. Um, and so you have to search for your community here. You know, it's sometimes you don't know. I feel like every time somebody meets somebody Ecuadorian, one of my friends is like, "Here for you," which I appreciate. I'm still trying to find more Ecuadorian writers in the United States. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I have some writers that I really like. Raúl Pérez Torres. I like his short stories are pretty cool. I mean,
Okay.
it's interesting how he writes.
I'm gonna
Uh,
write this down.
yeah, yeah. Raúl Pérez Torres. He actually became kind of part of the cultural ministry in Ecuador. But it was interesting. I really like his short stories. I mean, some parts I remember one that the style of the writing was it was changing every sentence, kind of like the story was transforming through each sentence. Like the next sentence start. I mean, it's like it was like the thought process of someone who was thinking, and then at the started a story, and then and then another story, and I was wow, this was really well done. It was like yeah, and there is another author that I forgot the name of the author, but I know the name of the book is a man, un hombre muerto a puntapiés.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it tells a story about a man who was killed by being like hit by the shoes or people hitting them, and it was kind of mystery thriller. And it's interesting about this author that he became crazy. He was put in the mental institutions for some reason, and but he wrote super interesting literature. Yeah, but I don't remember the name of the author. But yeah, actually I don't know that deep about Latin American writing, but I mean I know more about the other authors like Alfredo Parejo Diez Canseco or José de la Cuadra, and this book is called Baldomera or
You said Jose
um, yeah, José,
de la Cuadra.
sí, José de la Cuadra, Alfredo,
Okay, you need some. You need some. Do you have any female authors?
female authors.
I have some for you. I have
Yes, please.
Juliana Ortiz Ruano. She wrote a
Okay,
book called Fiebre Carnaval,
okay.
and it's available in the United States and in Ecuador. And she's from Esmeraldas, and so her book, her first novel, she's written a lot of like zines, but this is her first novel,
Mm,
and it's about a young girl growing up in Esmeraldas and sort of how it's sort of like a forgotten part of Ecuador.
yeah,
And I don't. This one's translated in English, but it's Maria Fernanda Ampuero, and it's
María
called
Fernanda Alfredo.
Cockfight. And it's like
Mm,
it's short stories, like feminist short stories.
María
And so
Fernanda
I'm
Alfredo.
and so I'm reading those because I it's really important to me to find not just authors from Ecuador that live here or in diaspora, like, in Europe or in other parts of the world, but authors that are living in Ecuador and writing in Ecuador.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Raúl Pérez Torres, I think is he's alive still, so I think
Oh, okay.
yeah. I don't, and
Yeah, and
the other ones were already dead. I think.
oh, okay.
Yeah,
No, these ladies are very much alive.
yeah. Yeah, and something that you were talking about, like, is this. I mean, we're talking about different writing styles about fantasy and science fiction. This is something for me also interesting about. For sure, Latin America, there is not much science fiction just because Latin America is not as developed as other countries that have more technology.
Hmm.
But also, I feel like there is a tendency to end up explaining fantasy uh, like science fiction sometimes, and whereas Latin America is mostly everything is fantasy. Fantasy doesn't never turn into science fiction. So yeah.
Um, there's I can think I have to find it. I'll find it after. But there's one anthology of science fiction from Latin American authors, and I think you might like like the cover and the style. I'll keep thinking about it to try to remember it.
Hmm.
But there's a little bit of it. There's I think that it's theirs. They think it just needs an audience.
Yes. And how I'm talking about the audience. How I mean, what does the audience appreciate this infusion of Latin American culture you're putting in your books, or do they comment on that?
It's hard to say. It so in the United States, some people just don't want to read Spanish. I have a lot of like people write to you or they leave reviews and it's like I hated this because it's too much Spanish. I didn't want to buy a book with Spanish, and I'm like, well, the title has Spanish words, so that should have told you something. But then I've had the majority of responses have been like, this reminds me of my grandmother who never talked about her past. And it's people from all over, from like Latin ancestry. Or I remember I had this woman who was like, my grandmother's Polish and she came here from Poland, but she is exactly like Orquídea Divina. And, I know this book is not for like about me, but it felt like it was for, stuff like that. So I do have a lot of people. Sometimes you have a little extreme. Like I had somebody write to me and say like, I know how I love the Brooklyn Brujas because I can make magic. I can make things come into fire. I can like turn things into fire. And I was like, great. I'm glad you could connect to my book. Please don't set anything on fire. So it ranges. But I think there's nothing for me to do about reception or how people are reading the book. I just have to write my next book.
Yeah. And talking about these people that believe in magic, I guess I mean my experience in Latin America, as we thought before, is like there is not much difference between reality and magic sometimes, and this is magic realism in a way. So, and I heard in a podcast you made that you said that you didn't want to identify much about magic realism in the past because you, I mean, really was interested in that. And I wanted to ask you two things. First, what is your relationship with magic? And because for me, it's like, I mean, I knew there were things about shamanism in Ecuador, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm open minded. But now that I experienced that, it's like, okay, there is something there that is really real for me. In the past, I might dismiss it more. So I wanted to ask you, what is your relationship with this magic, or is only science fictions, or is more personal?
Well, I when I was 10 years old, I wrote in my diary, "Dear diary, I'm now a witch." Right? Like I think I've always, and it was after like we had gone to church and we came home and I was like, I don't like this. I don't I don't like this man. I don't like, like this old man preaching. And, I apologize to anyone who believes in that. But I think that there's, like from a very young age, some people just know what their faith is. And I think that for me, I don't look to give it a name. Um, I think that I believe that there has to be more. When you take, I create religions in my books, and I create mythology in my books, and I try to make them original, but they're usually inspired by the things that I love. Um, but whether I don't know, I guess believe in it is different, and I think I'm open to believing in stuff, and I'm superstitious even though I don't want to be. But I still am. Like I never take this little necklace off of my evil eye. Like I never take it off because I'm like, if I take this off, somebody's gonna curse me. And I'm a very practical person, but that is the most impractical thing about me. um, and so yeah, so from a very young age, I already knew like I want to believe in something else. And I think that other thing is nature, right? It's like who we are as human beings when we care about the nature around us and the people around us. And I feel like that ties into a lot of the more pagan, earthy religions, and beliefs, that have survived, you know, conquest and colonization and Catholicism and Christianity. And so uh, I would rather sit, you know, with like a bunch of elders telling me stories about, you know, Inca gods or Cañari gods, uh, than like go to church and
Yeah.
tell, and stuff like that. So uh, unfortunately, my family does not always feel the same way.
Yeah.
But I think that goes into my book. As for the magical realism stuff, specifically as a writer, as a Latina writer who writes fantasy, the critics of like, the people who read books, as soon as they see Latina fantasy, they're like, "Oh, that's magical realism." Even if it's not. Even if I'm writing a book about superheroes, you know? And so that's why I was always like, "No, my book is a fantasy book." And then finally, I wrote Orquídea Divina, and I was like, okay, now this is magical realism. So it's my own fault. Like, it's.
Yeah. So this is also in yeah, I really like this idea of magic realism. I mean, I guess because it makes sense. I guess, and as you say, in Europe they used to have more of this magic, but I feel like there is a different cultural aspect to that. I know there are some cultures in the past that they have this idea of the nature and you are part of nature, but I feel like from the Greeks, the mythology was more okay. There are gods are humans,
Mm-hmm.
like whereas in Latin America, gods were always animals, the river,
Mm-hmm.
and there is more about nature was not different from humans. So I feel like first there is a different point of view of nature. We are nature, like we are part of nature. We use the power of nature, and we pray for nature. And there is not only nature as these individual elements, but also there is a big thing called nature that can be something like a god. And also, I mean, this is a different point of view. And the mythology in Europe for sure was a more Apollo or this goddess that created sun, or the fire. But even today, if we come forward to the present, like um, there is, since industrialization is taking over, I feel like these magical things and these fantasy things also come through the connection with nature.
Mm-hmm.
There's the unknown with nature, but when I here in at least in Berlin, in these developed countries, there is less space for nature because there is more buildings, there is more construction, and I guess that's why it's been lost in a lot of these cities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Even
I
though,
yeah,
oh, finish your thought. Finish
no,
your
no, no,
thought.
that was my thought.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, it. something like when you say about industrialization, I think it's just like industrialization and fantasy go so hand in hand, especially when you think about old books like Lord of the Rings. How do you say Lord of the Rings?
Mm,
El Señor de los Anillos.
yeah.
Lord of the Rings, like J.R. Tolkien was writing about industrialization, right? He has like trees that are protecting the other trees in the forest because the orcs are gonna destroy them with fire and metal, right? And so that he was like he this person is writing about that change and how he like and so all the villains are the people who destroy our nature, to build these machines and factories. And I think about all the time like our our place and how the world is just going to keep changing with more humans and more people and more things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, that's interesting because science fiction, right? So you have written for Star Wars as well.
Hmm.
Like, and that's something I really like about Star Wars. Is like there is this feeling of there is something bigger. I mean, because there is something almost like a religious. There is like the Jedi's
Yes.
pray
Yeah.
for this. There is the Force is something religious, and actually, I don't know if you know about this, but George Lucas was influenced by this author called uh, c- um, Carlos Castañeda, who was an anthropologist who started training with a shaman and created this book called The Teachings of Don Juan. And the shaman in this book, he talked about the force, because he talked about Toltecs. They were talking about this big force, and and George Lucas supposedly took reference for the relationship between Yoda and the Luke Skywalker from this book, and also he took reference from the Force from this author. And but that's something that I really like, because I was also talking with an anthropologist, a musician. He was telling, yeah, I mean, what he would talk about the future, about technology, and he was saying, that, yeah, we can infuse technology with these souls, and I mean, with like, I don't know if soul, but something more magical if we want to. So I guess
Hmm.
that's what I like about Star Wars, and I mean, I maybe you can tell me how do you feel about science fiction in that sense.
I think science fiction for me, I don't really do science too like like I'm not very good at memorizing science facts. I love science. I think that I love learning about the world. Um, but I don't when I write science fiction, I think I write more science fantasy. Like Star Wars is science fantasy. There's nothing scientific about flying in space in Star Wars or going to a new planet. But it gives us the opportunity to tell the story of people when we take away all the other things. Like we take away like racism, classism, uh, all the things that divide us. Um, and so you go to a planet in Star Wars, and there could be um, uh, a different species there, but all humans are humans, right? All aliens are aliens. We don't call them aliens, but I'm just calling them aliens in this podcast.
Yeah.
Um, we call them beings,
Yeah.
which is I can't use the word aliens.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, so that's something that's interesting about Star Wars is that like all humans are human. Everybody's like the only thing that divides you is like the dark side and the light side, right? Of the Force. Uh, and so Star Wars is almost like an equalizer. But I love writing for Star Wars. I started my first Star Wars book was in 2019, and I wrote a novel for the theme parks in Disney World,
Hmm.
Galaxy's Edge, and then my second book was Star Wars Convergence, The High Republic, and I have a new one coming out next week.
Hmm.
Uh, and it's called Beware the Nameless, and that one is for younger kids.
Hmm.
And it um, it takes place on a planet called Palagosal, which is just Galapagos like scrambled. Uh,
Ah, that's quite amazing.
there is actually a planet in Star Wars named Aerodak, and
Ah,
It's just Ecuador scrambled. But it's more like different parts of the Andes. Like I describe like the Rainbow Mountains, which are in Peru, and like different, it some writers, when they look at Star Wars, they think a lot of like Japanese influence, or Arabic and Indian influences in like the
you're right.
planets.
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, so now we're gonna have some Andean influence over here. So it just gives you a big limit. It doesn't give you a limit. It's like it's expansive. You can create freely in this world.
Yeah, that's really cool that they are putting Andean culture because I guess I mean even in Ecuador the Andean culture hasn't been really. I mean even though we live among the Andean culture, it's not something that has been brought to the surface. It's mostly Catholicism and Spanish culture is trying to take over, and it's
Mm-hmm.
Andean culture seems like something inferior. But it's super rich. It's super deep, and it's something that I always fascinated about. And I was in New York in the museum. I don't know if you went to the museum and seen the.
Which one? The
Uh,
natural history
yeah,
on the. Okay, yeah, I love that museum. There is
and
a section that has Ecuador stuff. Yeah.
yeah, but this Andean, the Andean culture is super big, and I seen things there I haven't seen even in Ecuador, like the fabric, how they did the music. It was amazing for me. I spent like I don't know 3 hours. I was taking photos like crazy because I didn't want to lose all this information. And yeah, it's really cool that you can put that in Star Wars because it's I mean it has so many cultures as you said, and yeah, you can explore that part of I mean of Ecuador, and people
Mm-hmm.
might not even know about that. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Um, Talking about exploring cultures, um, what I notice is that now that there is more Latin American population going to the US, media has changed,
Mm-hmm.
and there is more Latin American influences getting into movies or music or writing. Um, can you tell me your experience? How I mean, if you have experienced also this change in media, or
Yes and no. I think that I've had I've had people come to me and they're like, "Oh, we want to do Orquídea Divina, but can we make the family Mexican instead of Ecuadorian?" And I'm like, "No, no, it's not the same thing."
yeah,
And then I tried, and I think that it's like it's almost like inevitable because American society doesn't understand Latinos. They don't know. They think that, and this is our own fault. This is our fault in Latin America because in Latin America, you have telenovelas, and everyone in the telenovela is European looking, right? They speak
yes,
Spanish, but they look Europe. They're white, and so when Americans, they're like, oh, Latinos look like Shakira and Sofia Vergara. They don't look like Laz Alonso, who's Afro-Cuban, or Zoe Saldana, who's Dominican and a black woman. Like, so it's hard. We've made it harder to show people that Latinos look different, and even within our own countries we have different ancestry and backgrounds and cultures. So it's just because Americans like things very easy. They like to put things in like little, boxes. Like for instance, like yesterday, I was filling out some paperwork for like tax for like school, and it's like it gives you a checklist, and it says, "Are you Hispanic, Latino, or whatever?" And if you click yes, then it says, "Are you from Hispanic, Latino, Mexican, Hispanic, Latino, Cuban, Hispanic, Latino, Puerto Rican, or other?" And like, and then it's like, and then it asks for your race, and it's like, are you white, black, Alaskan native, Native American, or Asian and Pacific Islander? And so you're like, okay, what do I choose?
Other.
Other. So I think that the United States has a long way to go before they can encompass all Latin American people. I think that you always see the same shows. A Mexican family, somebody gets deported. A Mexican family, there's a cartel. A Mexican,
Yeah.
and then when it's different, it's the only show that I felt did a good job was the TV show Jane the Virgin, which came from there's an American version of the Venezuelan telenovela,
Mm.
and there's actually a
Ah,
guy.
yeah.
There's actually a guy, and I have his book here. His name is Rafael Agustin, and he was born in Guayaquil, and he found out he was undocumented when he was 18 and trying to
Wow.
go to college. And so, because his parents brought him and didn't tell him about their situation. But now he's like a Hollywood guy. He wrote on Jane the Virgin in season 4 and the rest of the seasons. And, he's such a good person, and like, he understands, like, there's we have a lot of explaining to do when it comes to to creating different images of what Latino looks like in the United States. And there's also the movie In the Heights, which tried to show how different we are, and had a great, it's one of my favorite musicals.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, so I think, I don't, I ramble and I go on different thought tangents, but anyway, but yeah, I think that I'm just going to keep writing about Ecuadorian people until somebody notices.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, I don't remember how many times I've been told, "Are you from Mexico?" or "Are you
Hmm.
from Peru?" It's like I'm from Ecuador, and people don't have a clue about Ecuador.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and then also the trying to paint a picture of yeah, how you should act, or if you like these things or others. I mean, for sure there is commonalities among Latin American
Hmm.
cultures, but I think the other problem is like Latin America people are looking so forward to U.S. culture and European culture that often maybe they want to show their own particular cultures, and this is one part. But also, is in school and in I don't know when I was growing up, it's not that you are infused. Be proud of being Ecuadorian. Be proud of this about the Andes, or be proud about Cañaris or Huancavilcas or Cultura Valdivia, and but also the stories about these historic events or historic cultures hasn't been told, so I don't know much about it. And part of me doing the podcast is also to discover more about that because I know it's really rich and really deep.
Hmm.
It's just hasn't been told.
Hmm. I went to Guayaquil last year, um, or maybe the year before that. Time. But I went to I no, it was last year. I went to Guayaquil last year, and I hadn't seen my dad in like 5 years. And so I went to see my dad and my stepmom and my brothers and sisters that still live there. And we went to a museum in by right by the river El Malecon. I don't
Mac,
remember the name of
the
El
Mac.
Mac. See, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it had some incredible stuff from the pre-Columbian periods of Ecuador. And I just like I have like hundreds of pictures of just like because I'm like I'm gonna need this for a book at some point because you know we have to put in our culture somewhere. But I thought it was really beautiful and it's there and I was surprised like not a lot of it's the museum's free and
Yeah.
nobody was in there and there's like a handful of people there and I feel like we also have to go look for our stuff in our cities. um yeah.
Yeah.
Also there's air conditioning, it's air conditioned.
It's pretty good museum. I used to go because I studied in basically next to the museum. There was my
Hmm.
university, Espol, I mean not the whole university, but this faculty of arts was there.
Hmm.
So I used to go to the cinema, go to the museum, and hang out there, and it was pretty cool. It's sad because now the museum is pretty in a rough shape now because there is. I mean, since they are running out of money, and yeah, I was trying to get the head of the museum into the podcast as well to tell me about the situation because I mean it's sad right now. It's a little bit Ecuador is is in a lot of troubles now, but yeah, I find that yeah it's something I really thought really interesting from this guy. He's from Argentina, but his dad is Peruvian, and his mom he's from Italy. He was telling me that's I mean as people are in Latin America looking forward for being more from like as the US or from Europe, these like, indigenous cultures has kind of been kind of lost in the culture or is not looked for, as you said. And he was telling me which I mean maybe it's a responsibility of people who are not completely indigenous because there is a discussion, oh, if you are not super indigenous, why are you looking for these indigenous things? I mean, this is already over, nobody cares about that. And he was telling me, I mean, no, I mean, we are the people who are interested are mestizos because even indigenous people are looking in smartphones or I don't know watching looking for Apple's devices and things like,
Yeah.
and they might not be interested in that, and maybe we don't need to put the responsibility in them. Maybe people who are mestizo like us are the ones who want to learn more about it, recover it, and just embody
Yeah,
it.
and I think that there are a lot of young indigenous people in Latin America, and I try to follow all these accounts of these like young indigenous or Afro descendant Black Latinos who are trying to show like you know there's so many parts about Latin America where we would not have salsa music or good food or uh, uh, some of our language words without the African and the indigenous
Yes.
ancestry. I mean, thank you, Spain, for bringing the pigs to in the 1400s so we can have
Yes.
pernil, hornado. but um, but that's it. And so it like I think that I wish there was a way to show, and I obviously I try to do this through my books, the things that the Latin America has given to the world, as far as like food and culture and things like that. Um, and so yeah, I like all I can do is keep writing in my fantasy space.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah.
Yeah, I also think super interesting about what you said about African culture because I think not many people. I mean, we talk a lot about indigenous people from
Mm-hmm.
Latin America, but the African migration was is a big part of Latin America, especially in Ecuador. That is this state or province that is Esmeraldas. That is. supposedly this ship was a shipwreck
Mm-hmm.
that brought all
Yeah.
these African Ecuadorians now, and just influenced so much the culture. Like the food is the encocados,
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah,
coconut,
all of our food,
the
our
music.
music, drums, and that's why Julie, oh my God, Juliana's book, Fiebre Carnaval, is set in Esmeraldas and specifically about Afro descendant culture in that part of Ecuador.
Yeah, I actually yesterday I went to here in Berlin. I have a friend who is from Brazil, and he took me. He's learning how to play in a music style from Brazil, and were giving a presentation about this a band with a lot of drums, and they were singing, and it was interesting because he was saying that the music basically is part of the religion, and the religion
Mm-hmm.
is not only African but mixed with indigenous from America. So I don't remember the name of the religion, but the music they were playing basically was part of the religion. It was part of the dancing, and this is interesting because I didn't know there was a religion in Brazil. There was a mixture between African and indigenous,
Mm-hmm.
and it's pretty cool because. Yeah, I wonder. I guess I have to research more how this mythology is, how it looks. What are the gods? What are the
Mm-hmm.
ideas of the concepts there?
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I think anywhere where communities sort of combine, I like look at like our something like Santeria, right? It comes from the Yoruba traditions of Nigeria. And so when you have like the Portuguese and the Spanish bringing over slaves, um, and saying like, oh, you can't practice this anymore. So then you have like the Santeria, Orisha, like all the Orishas become saints, right? And I love that. I don't know what it's called when a culture just like sort of like you put something in on top of each other. Another reason I find Ireland so fascinating because like their gods also became like absorbed. Like Saint Bridget, was like a pagan, like a god, a Celtic god, or an Irish goddess, um, and now is like a Catholic saint. So
ah,
I just find that so fascinating. But I'm glad that like people are interested in looking at that mythology again.
yeah, and also it's interesting. Catholicism in Ecuador in Latin America is super different than the Catholicism in Europe. Like Latin America, it's a lot of virgins for everything. The
Mm-hmm.
virgin of the water, the saint water, virgin of this place, virgin, and I think this is super pagan because in Latin America, I mean, from what my experience in the Amazon, I mean, they believe in something bigger that is like modern nature, and it's super feminine. This is super feminine ethos that is different from the ethos of the Catholicism that is masculine ethos, and it's always been this clash of these both ethos, and that's why you see more importance in communities in Ecuador for virgins instead of the God or Jesus, and I find that's fascinating and something I grew up with and I take for granted just because we were just involved in that. But it's weird in Europe to have that, or is it rare because it happens, but it happens less.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's all great, but it's where I pull, inspiration when I'm writing. So,
Yeah,
um, I just have to keep doing it.
yeah. And can you tell me more about your future projects? What are you working on? And
Uh, so I have another. So my next Star Wars book comes out August 27th on
Mhm.
Tuesday. Um,
Congrats.
and thank you. And then I'm currently writing a new book, a new fantasy book. Um, and I'm not really sure what it's going to be or how like what it's going to end up as, but it's sort of like a fantasy 1800s Latin America, um, but very very loosely. Um, And then I have my next novel that comes out next year. It's about fallen angels. Like it's there's a murder mystery and a love story, but it's not finished yet either.
Great. Well, I'm happy to be talking to you and learn more about your writing, your research about Latin American culture, and also how people, I mean, how Latin American um, migrants and people who live in the U.S. Are like perceiving Latin America, or are thinking about Latin America, or are trying to show Latin America to the world. Yeah, and thank you again for being here. And yeah, um, I don't know if you want something else to say to the audience. You want to say?
I mean, I think just keep your mind open when you're reading new books and watching things, and just know how diverse all the countries of Latin America are within themselves. And you can find me on Instagram at Zoraida Solo, and my website zoraidacordova.com.
Great. Okay. Thank you, everybody. See you in the next episode.
Yay!
Bye bye.